met people in communities all around the world. And through that, I thought I knew. I thought I had an awareness to...
The shameless Sussexes have ensured their kids are known as Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet because it is their birthright. Well, Meghan's biographer Tom Bower joins me.
Harry was never supposed to face scrutiny as a father. Fatherhood was meant to redeem him. But Tom Bower just turned that narrative on its head. The biographer famous for blowing open royal secrets now hints that Archie and Lilibet's origins may not match the story we were sold. And if Bower's claim holds even a shred of truth, the carefully crafted fairy tale shatters in an instant.
Tell Californian kids to be prince and princess. It's beyond a joke. It's beyond a joke now.
Well, it's king and queen of hypocrisy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they are the arch hypocrite.
For years, Prince Harry has used fatherhood as his shield. When critics called him weak, he pointed to Archie. When Meghan faced backlash, he raised Lilibet as proof of their new life in California. Fatherhood wasn't just personal, it became the Sussex brand. But Tom Bower's latest bombshell targets the one detail they've protected more fiercely than anything else, whether those children are even theirs by blood. And that contradiction, the self-proclaimed truth-tellers accused of hiding the ultimate truth, is why the world can't look away. Bower points to cracks that were always in plain sight. Meghan's pregnancy timelines never quite matched. Baby bumps appeared to shift between appearances. Unlike William and Kate's open hospital steps tradition, Harry and Meghan staged a tightly controlled photo call. Reports even suggest birth records were sealed, curated, or quietly altered. Individually, these quirks could be brushed aside. Together, Bower argues, they form a disturbing picture, one leading straight to whispers of surrogacy, secrecy, and legitimacy. If he's right, this isn't just about privacy. It's about succession. And that's why the fairy tale could collapse overnight.
He then pedaled back on Harry because he knew it was untrue. It was one of Meghan's many lies. And that is really what's so awful. And that's why Charles tried very hard yesterday to assert the importance of the Commonwealth.
Fans can forgive Hollywood photo ops. They can forgive Netflix cash grabs and even Spotify flops. But the royal family's bloodline? That's sacred. Once that comes into question, whispers turn into headlines. Suddenly, anonymous online forums became front-page news. GB News commentators asked it outright. Why won't the Sussexes take a DNA test? Even sources quoted in the Daily Mail admit that silence only makes it worse. The irony is cutting. A couple who built their rebellion on speaking their truth now look guilty precisely because they won't speak at all. Reports say Harry is unraveling, pacing the halls of Montecito, ranting at staff, doom-scrolling coverage into the night. The man once crowned the therapy prince is now mocked as a man who can't cope with his own truth. Meghan, meanwhile, plays the opposite role, cold, strategic, allegedly drafting legal threats against anyone daring to echo Bower's claims. To critics, that looks like concealment. To fans, it looks like control. But either way, the silence is gasoline. Every day they refuse to answer is another day the same question grows louder. If there's nothing to hide, why hide it? And that's where the contradiction burns brightest.
And he should make quite clear that Harry is not welcome. But everything about Charles is so indecisive. He can't even at the moment decide whether he should wear a uniform or not on the coronation or breach it.
Harry and Meghan claimed they fled the palace to escape secrecy. But now Tom Bower says their entire survival depends on guarding the biggest secret of all. The contradiction is devastating, because when Bower speaks, it doesn't stay in whispers. It detonates. Within hours, what had once lived on obscure blogs was suddenly plastered across primetime broadcasts and front-page headlines. The shift was seismic, gossip rebranded as a constitutional crisis. And that's where the Sussex nightmare truly begins. Fans moved first. On TikTok, #ShowTheProof surged past 1 million views in a single day. Old clips of Meghan's shifting baby bump resurfaced, stitched with commentary. Why did the palace births look so different? Reddit threads titled DNA or Bust shot to the top of royal forums. Memes flooded timelines, some mocking, some ruthless, but all demanding the same thing. What began as rumor had transformed into a public trial, and the court of opinion wasn't waiting for the couple's defense.
He wants to please everybody, and yet he poses as a confrontationist, and it doesn't work. So he should have, vis-a-vis the Sussexes, cancelled the titles and he should make absolutely clear that Harry is not well.
One viral post captured it all. William and Kate smiling outside the hospital steps versus Harry and Meghan's carefully staged photo call. The caption read, "Transparency versus secrecy." Cruel, yes, but devastatingly effective. Because once the internet reduces a scandal to a meme, it never really disappears. Then came the commentators. Piers Morgan called it, "the one question Meghan can't sue away." GB News reframed it as a constitutional crisis, not a private matter. Even the cautious Times noted the glaring difference between Sussex photo ops and the openness of past royal births. Each headline fed the fire, giving the claims more oxygen, and with every echo, the pressure mounted. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered about a split response. Staffers in Montecito allegedly told the Daily Mail that Harry wanted to fight fire with fire, issue a blunt public denial, and shut it down. Meghan, they claimed, pushed for the legal route, warning that any statement would only trigger louder demands for DNA proof. It painted not a united front, but a marriage under strain. Harry unraveling emotionally, Meghan strategizing coldly. And as the Sussexes hesitated, the institutions began to stir. Palace insiders reportedly told The Telegraph they saw the scandal as toxic but containable, so long as they stayed silent. But silence cut both ways. If the palace distanced itself, critics asked, wasn't that tacit acknowledgement that the doubts were valid? Even Westminster began to murmur. A handful of parliamentarians warned that if bloodlines were in doubt, then succession itself was in doubt. That's not gossip, one commentator warned. That's governance.
Tom, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this Commonwealth Day actually was important because of all of the damage that Netflix series did literally a few weeks.
The escalation was undeniable. What began as whispers about a celebrity couple's children had transformed into a question about the monarchy itself. Fans mocked, critics analyzed, institutions hedged, and at the center, Harry and Meghan stayed silent. But silence in scandal doesn't freeze the narrative, it accelerates it. With every unanswered day, the question grew louder. Would the Sussexes defend their family or allow Tom Bower's claim to define them? Digging into Bower's allegations only deepened the puzzle. According to reports, the first red flags weren't whispered on anonymous forums. They were noticed inside palace walls. Staff were unsettled by how Meghan's pregnancy was handled compared to Kate's. Gone was the tradition of a hospital reveal, where mother and child were presented openly on the steps. Gone was the careful but transparent release of birth records. In their place came secrecy, vague announcements, limited access, and carefully staged photo calls. To the public, it looked like a modern departure from outdated tradition. To insiders, it looked like concealment. Then came the visuals, details critics replayed endlessly. Meghan's baby bump seemed to shift in size and shape between appearances. Smaller one day, unusually pronounced the next. Tabloids hinted at the oddities but couched their language carefully, unwilling to make accusations outright. Bower, however, dragged the whispers into daylight. Birth records added more fuel to the fire. Reports surfaced of irregularities, missing details, even unexplained edits. Journalists familiar with royal archives noted that the standard of transparency applied to William and Kate's children simply wasn't followed with Archie or Lilibet. Where one branch of the family offered paperwork, hospital steps, and a clear timeline, the other offered silence and curated imagery. For Bower, these discrepancies weren't circumstantial. They formed a deliberate pattern. When combined with Meghan's tightly controlled photo releases, always staged on her terms, critics argued the effect was undeniable. Something was being hidden. But the most explosive revelation extended beyond optics. It struck at the monarchy's very foundation, bloodlines, and legitimacy. If surrogates were involved, why hide it? If outside donors played a role, what would that mean for succession? For a monarchy built entirely on lineage, these weren't small questions. They were existential threats. As one legal analyst told Sky News, if there's even the appearance of uncertain lineage, constitutional lawyers will demand clarity. It's unavoidable. The personal toll on the Sussexes was equally brutal. Insiders quoted by the British press painted Harry as fragile, paranoid, even obsessive. He was said to pace the Montecito estate late into the night, glued to coverage, snapping at staff, consumed by the idea that his fatherhood, his very identity, was under attack. Meghan's reported response could not have been more different. Calculated, strategic, and cold. Legal threats drafted against outlets repeating Bauer's claims, yet carefully withheld. Because critics warned, suing risks dragging evidence into open court. One wrong move could transform rumor into sworn testimony. And that looming risk left their silence looking less like dignity and more like guilt. By the time Bauer's revelations settled into the global press cycle, the Sussex fairy tale had been rewritten. They were no longer escapees building a modern life in California. They were now cast as potential architects of a deception so deep it threatened not just their personal brand, but the monarchy itself. And history has shown again and again, once legitimacy is questioned, it is never forgotten. The reaction was immediate and unrelenting. Outside Buckingham Palace, protesters waved signs reading DNA or done. On TikTok, creators stitched clips of Harry's mental health speeches with Bauer's claims, asking, "How can the therapy prince preach honesty while hiding the most basic truth?" On Twitter, #RoyalDeception trended alongside viral clips of Meghan's Oprah interview, where she spoke of authenticity and truth. The contrast was devastating. The couple who had once accused the palace of lies now stood accused of engineering the biggest one of all. Commentators piled on. Piers Morgan called it, "The one question Meghan can't sue away." GB News reframed the issue as constitutional, not private. Even cautious outlets like The Times noted the glaring differences between the Sussexes' approach to childbirth and the openness of William and Kate. Each headline gave the allegations more oxygen. Each broadcast added more pressure. Behind the scenes, insiders suggested a divide. Harry wanted to issue a public denial, to fight fire with fire. Meghan, however, warned that any statement would only invite louder demands for DNA proof. The picture painted wasn't one of unity, but of strain, an unraveling marriage under siege. And while the Sussexes hesitated, institutions began to circle. Royal insiders whispered that the palace saw the scandal as toxic but containable, provided the family stayed silent. But silence cut both ways. If the palace distanced itself, wasn't that tacit acknowledgement that doubts had merit? Parliamentarians, too, began murmuring about constitutional clarity. As one political commentator warned, if there's doubt about bloodlines, there's doubt about succession. That's not gossip. That's governance. What began as whispers about a shifting bump and sealed records had detonated into something far larger, a constitutional storm threatening the crown itself. And the most dangerous part wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't answered. Every silence from Montecito acted like oxygen to the fire. For the Sussexes, the question was no longer about protecting privacy. It was about survival. Industry insiders didn't take long to follow the headlines. A former Netflix executive told Variety that the streaming giant was quietly terrified of being tied to a collapsing brand. If Harry and Meghan's carefully polished family fairy tale turned toxic, billions in content deals and future contracts could be jeopardized. Spotify had already walked away. Could Netflix be next? Book publishers, once eager to cash in on the Sussex story, whispered about the risk of associating with a narrative that might implode under DNA questions. For Meghan, whose strategy has always depended on monetizing the Sussex image, this was the nightmare scenario. Partners doubting not just her projects, but her family's very story. Even the palace, famous for silence, began to shift. Royal correspondents reported that courtiers were quietly drafting strategies to shield the institution if the scandal deepened. One insider quoted in The Telegraph described the Windsor approach in chillingly simple terms. Don't interfere, but don't embrace. In other words, protect the crown and leave Harry and Meghan isolated. To critics, that very distance looked damning. If the palace won't defend the Sussex children, does that mean the whispers have weight? The cultural fallout spread far beyond Britain. In America, commentators drew brutal comparisons. Meghan was likened to Elizabeth Holmes, building an empire on a story now under forensic scrutiny. Harry, meanwhile, was compared to Britney Spears in his darkest days, a man unraveling in public, collapsing under the weight of contradictions he couldn't carry. The Sussexes, once packaged as the glamorous alternative to the monarchy, now risked being remembered as global cautionary tales. And here's where the tension peaked. Meghan's control versus Harry's unraveling. Reports suggested Harry begged to issue a public denial, desperate to reclaim his fatherhood. Meghan, described as cold and calculating, allegedly shut him down. That image, a broken prince silenced by a strategic wife, became tabloid dynamite. Fair or not, scandals rarely reward nuance. Harry is puppet, Meghan is puppeteer. The Sussexes had built their empire on a fairy tale, but at the height of the storm, that fairy tale looked less like freedom and more like fabrication. The aftermath of Tom Bower's revelation isn't just about headlines, it's about legacy. For Harry, the fallout cuts into the core of his identity. His redemption arc was built on fatherhood. Every time he stumbled, every time Meghan was criticized, Harry pointed to Archie and Lilibet as proof that his life had meaning beyond the monarchy. Now critics argue that the shield has shattered. Reports claim Harry is increasingly paranoid, locked in cycles of self-doubt, haunted by the cruel irony of being questioned as a father after branding himself the therapy prince. To the public, he looks less like Diana's brave son and more like a man consumed by secrets. For Meghan, the picture is different. She is cast less as broken, more as calculating. Insiders say legal teams have drafted threats against any outlet repeating Bower's claims. But here lies the paradox. The moment she sues, the door to evidence swings open. DNA tests, court filings, witness testimony, everything she has worked to keep sealed could be dragged into daylight. Silence, meanwhile, only fuels suspicion. Meghan's carefully curated image as the truth teller against the palace is now being dismantled by her refusal to tell the truth about her own family. For a woman who once demanded transparency from the monarchy, critics argue she now looks like the architect of the deepest deception. The monarchy itself hasn't escaped. By refusing to publicly support Harry and Meghan's children, the palace feeds speculation. Analysts argue the distance is intentional, a firewall to protect the crown from heirs who may one day be challenged. If true, it reveals a brutal calculation. The institution would rather sacrifice Harry's family than risk its legitimacy. And that leads to the final devastating question. Will Archie and Lilibet be remembered as royal heirs, or as symbols of scandal? In the end, Tom Bower's revelation didn't just ignite gossip. It tore open the single story Harry and Meghan could not afford to lose, the story of their family. Without that fairy tale, their empire of Netflix deals, book advances, and speaking tours looks fragile. Without that fairy tale, they risk being remembered not as freedom fighters against the palace, but as celebrities who built an illusion and couldn't hold it together. And that may be their undoing. Because scandals fade, but questions of bloodline never disappear. Which leaves us with one last irony. Harry and Meghan fled the palace to escape secrecy. Yet now, it's secrecy that may destroy them. If Tom Bower can shake the monarchy with one allegation, imagine the earthquake if proof ever surfaces. Subscribe now, because the day the truth breaks won't just be a headline. It will be history.